Welcome to Voices of Adoption, where we share unique perspectives, actionable advice, and meaningful stories of birth parents, adoptees, adoptive families, and other members of the adoption community. I'm Donna Pope, Executive Director of Heart to Heart Adoptions.
And I'm Nathan Gwilliam, founder and former CEO of Adoption.com.
Together, we've been part of thousands of adoption journeys over the past 25 years, and we're so glad you're here.
Let's begin today's conversation.
Welcome to Eternal Family Adoptions. I'm Donna Pope, your host, and I'm super excited to be here today with Brett and Bonnie Hilton. Now, what's so fun about this podcast is that I've known Brett and Bonnie for many, many years. And I know their love for the gospel. I know their love for their children. And I know their love for adoption. And so this is super excited to have them. Welcome, you guys.
Thanks, Donna. We're so happy to be here.
Brett, you married Bonnie how long ago?
We got married in 91.
Right. So that makes almost 34 years.
Almost
wow.
34 years.
But I've actually known Donna for 40.
Bonnie and I have been friends for many, many years, 4 decades, I guess. And I guess let's go back and start there. I knew Bonnie. We were actually roommates when we were at BYU. And I knew at the time that she wouldn't be able to have children biologically. Bonnie, do you want to tell us about that?
Right. I was born without a uterus, but I didn't find that out until I was about 14. And you can imagine being 14 and finding that kind of information out. It was dramatic, right? And devastating, although I didn't really talk a lot about it until I got into college. And then I started sharing it with some of my roommates because, that's kind of what you do when you get together with roommates. You talk about things that are personal and it connects you and you become even closer friends.
And how did you feel about it when you were 14 and found out you're not going to be able to have biological children?
Yeah, it was really hard because, I was a faithful member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And, they would always give talks about how it's such an amazing gift to be able to partner with the Lord and your husband and bring children to the earth. And I thought, I can't do that. And that was super disappointing. And I'm kind of the person that likes to think I can try and do anything, but that was out of my control. I couldn't do it.
So when you and Brett started to get close, of course, this would have been a conversation. How did that go?
Right. I'll tell you my side and then Brett can tell you his side. So that was always a point that would come up in dating, right? Because I felt like I had to be honest, especially as we got more and more serious, and tell them, well, guess what? I am not able to bear children. And sometimes that didn't work out so well because the person I was dating thought they would have children. And they really have never considered other options like adoption to bring children, to their family. But it was so interesting because when I mustered up the courage to talk to Brett about it, his response was quite different from others. And come to find out, his mother had struggled with infertility herself, and he had grown up hearing those stories. And so for him, it wasn't that out of the ordinary. Do you want to share anything about that?
Yeah, that's right. That's kind of how it happened. As the legend goes in our family is my mom and dad were married for 5 years and they couldn't get pregnant. And my mom had a priesthood blessing from her husband and her father. And 3 months later, she was 3 months pregnant. And then the interesting part of that is she contracted hives and they took her to the hospital and the doctor said, are you pregnant? She goes, I can't have children. So they gave her the drug adrenaline, and adrenaline will kill the fetus or make it deformed. And so when she came back to the doctor, told the doctor what had happened, that she was pregnant, and he looked at her and he said, "You dumb woman, if you haven't killed that baby, it'll be deformed." And so that doctor had suggested that they abort the baby, and they didn't, and it was me. It was a long labor. I was black and blue when I came out, and the nurse and the doctor suggested that they not look at the baby for a couple of days because it was so ugly. I guess I'm still ugly, and things haven't changed. But yeah, that started, and my parents had 5 kids total.
And so you kind of, in a way, thought miracles happen.
I did. In fact, when Bonnie told me she couldn't have children, I remember thinking, what difference does that make? I liked her. I liked her a lot. And I had gone through several hurdles to get her to agree to marry me, and it was just another one. So par for the course.
So you get married. You kind of wonder, is there going to be a miracle here? And then, now you're married, and how does the conversation around adoption come up?
Well, I always had this dream that maybe I could grow a uterus. And so I actually thought about that and prayed for that. But that obviously wasn't the Lord's plan. And interestingly, when I was serving as a missionary in Guatemala, our mission president started asking us about our menstrual cycle because he had learned that several missionaries weren't having their period. And so that gave him great concern. And so he started asking the sisters, and of course, all the sisters were sharing, "Oh, be prepared for this question," right? And so he asked me, and of course, my response was, well, I'd never had a period ever. And that just shocked him. And he was from Latin America. And so that surprised him greatly because the traditions there are that, women have children. But he pulled me aside during that interview and he said, "Before you leave to come home, I want you to remind me of this conversation." And so before he actually got transferred to another mission during my mission. So in that last interview before he left, I reminded him of that conversation. And he said, "My wife and I, we've adopted our children." And he shared that with me. And he said, in English, he said, "When you get married, you come back to Guatemala and we will help you adopt a child." And then he said, "I had made many happinesses." And so that was actually one of the first things we did after we were married is we contacted my mission president and asked if we could meet with him. We won a trip. We were poor as peasants, but miraculously, Brett won a trip to Mexico. We asked the people, could we switch it to Guatemala? And they agreed. And so we ended up going to Guatemala and we met with my mission president. But interestingly, we never really, nothing came to fruition from that meeting. And I think it was probably a timing thing. It probably just wasn't quite the right time.
So you did decide, though, to adopt. Tell us how that all came about.
Well, Brett, please feel free to jump in here. Because
I love listening to these stories.
Before we actually decided to adopt, we were praying about what to do to grow our family. And a woman in our ward, we were living in Knoxville, Tennessee at the time. And during General Conference, I had written down all my questions, and one of the primary questions was, how are we supposed to grow our family? I do that every general conference. It's just a pattern that I learned in my mission. And so I didn't really have any major promptings during the course of that general conference. And a woman approached us in the last session. Of course, this is when you had to go to a church to watch conference because we didn't have all the wonderful devices we have now. And she said, can I talk to you for a few minutes? And we said, sure. And so we went into the mother's lounge of all places because she kind of wanted some privacy. And then she said to us during Elder Ballard's talk on sacrifice, she said, I was told to carry a child for you. I don't know why you can't have children, but this is what I was told. And Brett and I were astounded. I mean, we had never considered a surrogacy. That wasn't just something we had even thought about or talked about. And so it gave us pause, and we kind of looked at each other, and she said, I know what I was told. Now you need to decide what to do. And so we prayed about it, thought about it. We had to even find out if I had ovaries, which I did, and they worked. And then we were able to get embryos, and we transferred those embryos into her body. And amazingly and miraculously, we had quadruplets. They were all born prematurely at 24 weeks. We didn't plan on that, but it was a high-risk pregnancy, obviously. And they were all born living, but one by one, they actually passed away. And so that was 31 years ago. They just had their birthday in August, which was about a month ago. And so it's a sweet memory now. At the time, it was, as you can imagine, devastating. And after that, we were just like, wow, do we want to be a parent? That was really hard. I don't know if we want to go down that road. And but we were acquainted with LDS Family Services. They were doing adoptions at that time. And we talked together, and we felt like, you know what, we may not feel ready right now, but by the time we feel ready, we will have had to have done a lot of paperwork. So that takes time. So we may as well get that done now. So we contacted LDS Family Services and started in the home study process.
Brett?
Yeah, that was a great memory. And, the thing I remember is the fear, the uncertainty. We started looking at the cost, and I was just like, oh my word, how are we going to afford this? And when Bonnie said we were poor, we were really poor. And I was still in school when this gal came to us. She was in our ward. Interestingly enough, her husband was a psychiatrist. She had been a nurse at a mental health facility. Bonnie was working as a therapist at a juvenile inpatient. And I was working on a PhD in family studies. And we're all members of the church, and I could just see the media getting a hold of this, these four crazy people doing a surrogacy. And this is when surrogacies, this is really one of the first surrogacies that took place. We were in Knoxville. We had to travel to Nashville, and it was one of the few clinics in the country. We asked the church, what their policy on this was, and there was no policy at the time. And
there was no law at the time.
There's no law.
There was no law.
What is your policy now?
I'd probably have to go look it up, but I think it's certainly between a husband and wife, regarding what they'd like to do. I think they encourage you to use your own biological material instead of having a husband with a different woman's material, if that makes sense.
But certainly it's a way to do it.
in the woman's ovaries. And then I think they would also discourage having a surrogacy if it was for, convenience. In our case, that was our only option.
At the time, but we were considering adoption. But when she came to us, we thought that we should move forward.
So even though we were doing the surrogacy, 3 years later, we're ready to adopt. We'd gone through the surrogacy. All 4 of the children had died, sadly. And
right. They died in 1995. And then we adopted our first daughter, Rebecca, in 1997. So it was a pretty short turnaround considering all the many things that happened during that time.
So you said, Brett, when you looked at the cost, you thought, oh my gosh, this is a lot. Well, LDS Family Services subsidized their adoption. And so it really wasn't very much. But for you at the time, that was still a lot of money.
10,000. I could have bought 7 cars with 10,000. We could have bought a home when we were living with an old lady in her basement. When she learned that we were having quadruplets, she evicted us. She goes, "That's not taking place at my house,"
Wow. So I've talked with people, and it seems like there's 3 reasons why LDS families hesitate to adopt. One is the price. And with LDS Family Services, that certainly was a lot lower than it is now. But the other was this idea of not having the genetics, you and Bonnie's genetics in this child. So not your nose, not your eyes, not your genetics. When you thought about adopting, how did you deal with that thought?
I would have to look in my journals, but the way I feel now and the way I remember it is that was not an issue for me.
Right. I don't really think I thought much about that either, to be honest. But to this day, I will say that I've wondered if our quadruplets look like us, right? But what's interesting is when people meet our adopted children, they will often say, "Oh, they look just like you." And they probably don't. I don't know, but they pick up your mannerisms and just, some of the ways that you talk. And I think and I'm brunette, and Brett, well, he's kind of grayish, whitish now, but he used to be a redhead. And so all of our kids are fair-headed. And although some of them have grown, to have darker hair over the years, but when they were young, they were all kind of fair. But when you saw us together, you could see how that would work. And so it wasn't too surprising when people would say that. But I don't know that we thought a whole lot about that.
Another concern people have is they think, oh. Now, this is going to be an interesting conversation because, Bonnie, when you adopted your first 2 and then when you adopted your second 2, there was a difference in what I'm about to ask. But people worry, will I be able to love this non-biological child in the same way that I would want to love my biological child?
And that's a great question, Donna. Great question. And boy, everybody's got to work through that. Do you want to take that?
Sure. I think our first 2 children, well, I guess our first 4 children were quadruplets, and we cared for one of them for almost a year in the NICU. So, of course, we learned to love him, but I don't know that I loved his siblings any less because I didn't get to interact too much with them, right? I still felt a deep love for them in my heart.
So I got to clarify that. Adam, the first 3 died within 2 days. And that was sad. And it was hard to deal with. But Adam lived for 10 and a half months in the NICU unit on a ventilator. And I remember at about 30 days, all the doctors and the nurses, it was a big meeting. Mm-hmm. Administrators saying, listen, kids don't live much longer. We're amazed that he made it for 30 days because he was born at 24 weeks. And he kept living and living and living. And Bonnie went up there every day. And when I say every day, it was every day. And I would go up for a couple hours after work. And, but she was there from morning to night. And the only vacation you had is you went to my brother's wedding.
Right.
In February. This was like at month 6. And he died
in June.
June.
Well, what was interesting is that he continued to live, and we would celebrate his birthdays every week. Every week that he lived, we would celebrate a birthday. And he had a little birthday card, and we would put the date on it. It was in his little isolette. And the social worker in that unit, she said, "You know what, Bonnie, when I see your legs underneath the isolette, I know that everything is well with the world." And I just became kind of a piece of furniture there, right? But he earned the name Crabgrass because he just wanted to keep living and he wouldn't die. And so they referred to him, the doctors did, as Crabgrass.
So I didn't mean to take you off, but now go back to your story. I can't remember what this question
was. It was about loving.
Okay.
So I think, I guess the point of that is that as we serve our children, we love them. So as whether a child's adopted or not, as we serve them and take care of them and help them and teach them, and we learn to love them. And, with our first 2, they were infants when we adopted them. Our second 2 were 2 and 4 when we adopted them. And yes, that bonding was definitely different because they were older and we hadn't served them. But as we served them and we came to know them, we love them. I think that's just a natural process that the Lord gives us. It's with anything. Anytime you serve anybody, you start to love them.
Red?
So the question is, restate the question again, Donna.
The question is, people worry that they're not going to be able to love adopted children in the same way that they would love their biological children.
So that is a question I had spent most of my life thinking about. Not necessarily adoption, but where do children come from? And because I would look at my brothers and sisters and I'd say, how did we make it here? How did we get here? And then later on when I married Bonnie, she is exactly 9 months. Well, she was born on January 9th. I'm born on November 14th. So what's that, 10 months? Almost with a couple days, 5 days to spare. I don't know if it, depending on how the calendar works. But I always joke that I waited for her to make sure she got out of her mom's womb. And then boom. Come on, Dad, let's make sure things happen here. And but that's when the priesthood blessing happened. But prior to that, I remember thinking all the time, how did the 5 of us kids get into our parents' home? What is it? Why didn't I come to one of my neighbors? Why not somebody in another town or another state or really in another country? And I remember thinking about that all the time and asking my parents, who were like, why are you even thinking about that? But it was like, what is going on in the pre-existence that allows, how do families form? How do kids get into certain families? And one of the things I concluded is that in the family formation, there's only one decision that we make, and that's who we marry. And we didn't really, as far as I know, I'm not aware of how I picked my parents, and I'm not aware of how we picked our children. So when we adopt, there's a little bit of that carryover in that I trust Father in heaven and everything that goes on, in the pre-existence and beyond the veil that I can't see to make sure that the children we get are, what's the next word I'm trying to look for, are right, are appropriate, are ours, are we coveted with, we made promises with. I'm not quite sure how to fill in the rest of that.
Well, Brett feels like the children that we've adopted, that there was no accident, there was no coincidence, that they came to us because that was a plan. And I'm not sure that I, fully agree with that, but I think we mingled together and I said, come on, join us. It's going to be awesome. And they were like, okay. And I kind of picture it like that. So I bet, we don't know how that all worked out, but.
And it's, I have convinced myself with multiple spiritual experiences and over many years that there are no accidents in who these children are that come to your family, whether they are born naturally or they're adopted. So let me repeat that again. There are no accidents. Now, I don't know how many people are going to line up on my side on this, but I know there's going to be a lot of people on the other side of the argument. But when it happens and this child gets into your home, it is not an accident. It is ordained. It is thought over. It was pre-planned. I can't think of a bunch of other words, but whatever those words are, that the heavens and Father in heaven knew what was going on. And I think we agreed to it. We knew what was going on. So when these children come, especially on international adoptions with older kids that are just, they rock their world. These families are like, what did we get into? And it's like, you agreed to this. And yeah, it will be tough. Kind of like Laman and Lemuel were tough for Lehi and Sarah. But that too will pass. They'll grow up. And bottom line, there are no mistakes.
Well, and our relationships that we have with our children are all different. But that's true for biological children too. You feel certain ways about certain children, and I think it's the same with adopted kids. My son, Isaac, I just have such a special place in my heart for that kid. And that's kind of strange because he's really our only living son, and he's got 3 sisters, and you would think I would feel a deep emotion because girls tend to be more emotional. But it's really with my son. Now with Rebecca, my relationship with her over the years, she was a terrorist as a teenager. And now she's just this amazing mom. And I have such a sweet relationship with her because we hung in there with her, just like parents do, right? You hang in there, and it's just awesome. And then my Ukrainian girls, they're very different from each other, even though they're biological sisters. And so my relationship with Esther is very, she is just so loyal and true. And on the other hand, she is more a free spirit and doesn't feel that same tie, but she's ours. And so anyway, so I think to sum that up, I think oftentimes we make a bigger deal out of whether or not we can love adopted children, because it's pretty similar to biological children.
Yeah. And it's kind of a choice. And you just love. So let's back up a little bit, because you've said the names of your kids. And so let's back up and talk about how you got them. So you mentioned that you were going to, the 4 quads kids had died. And that would have been very, very hard. But then you were starting to think about, okay, let's work with LDS Family Services to maybe adopt. Tell me how that went.
There are three things that I can remember.
Okay, you go.
One, you were emotional.
Well, that's a good.
Two, that first time that we adopted, boy, we were on pins and needles. And when, I don't know how many fails we had, 3 or 4. We tried to do a couple on our own. We'd go through LDS Social Services. We didn't go through just one avenue. Boy, we were looking all over, and that tore us up. Why did it tear us up? Because
adoption is intense. I mean,
intense.
There's so many emotions, and that's to be expected. So,
if I were to do it over again, I would be so calm and I would enjoy it. It would be like going to Disneyland for me. But it only took me 9 times to figure out. And, you know, it wouldn't matter whether they were in jail or what they were doing. I would love them and just enjoy the whole process. But at the time, it's taken me a long time to learn that. I think we both learned it together.
Probably. And we're, again, we handle it differently. I think women are more, at least for me, are tied into the child and who the child is, what we're going to name the child. And the men, at least Brett, is probably more concerned. How are we going to finance this? How is this going to impact, what we do with our money? And do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I always worried about money. It was king. And looking back, it was, if I were to do it again, I wouldn't worry about the money. Now, of course, I'm older. I'm in my 60s and I've done my 9 rodeos. And, but at the time I was just like, oh man, how are we going to finance this? This doesn't fit in the budget. We don't have money for this. And I stewed about it. At the end of the day, I hate to say this, but it's like the money falls out of the sky. That doesn't mean that you don't have to work for it, but I would cut the stress 90%. And you go to work, and it was amazing. Things at work would happen. Yeah. If we needed $12,000, we got this an account that paid us $12,200. And if we needed whatever it was just the series of miraculous events that helped us finance these adoptions are truly amazing.
Right. The windows of heaven definitely opened at different times, and we're really grateful for that. And I think, as you had said, Donna, when LDS Family Services was doing adoptions, they subsidized quite a bit. And so our first adoption didn't cost much. And our second adoption, we were actually making a little more. And so they cost us a little bit more with LDS Family Services. But then when we decided to go international to Ukraine, that was a lot more expensive. And but we still saw those same windows. And when we were over there, this was prior to the Hague Convention, which safeguards international adoption. We were over there in the early 2000s. And they kept asking us for money. And Brett started asking for receipts. And they weren't too happy about giving receipts. And in fact, our lawyer said, kind of in broken English, you play with children, we do adoption. And so we kind of got the message there. And but interestingly, Brett was kind of struggling with that same kind of financial piece. And tell him about that story from the social worker that he told you about.
Oh, yeah. So the social worker is a male. He's out of St. Louis. Isn't that right? I can't remember what agency. And I called him
during the course of of our experience in Ukraine, because he kept having to pay these fees. And so he called the social worker to kind of complain about it.
And because I didn't get it. Yeah, I just need to say that up front, is I didn't get it. If I could do it all over again, I would have, if they had have asked for 1,000, I would have given them 1,700. And knowing what I know now. And so the story is he said he could tell I was getting agitated. And I did not like looking into the trunk of this car and seeing all these chocolates and alcohol. And as we went around to move the paperwork through so we could get out of Ukraine, and I didn't understand all this. They were really helping us. But I thought they were doing nefarious things. And so when we would come in to see an official to get some paperwork done, they would hand the chocolates, they would hand the bottle of alcohol, which I don't drink, and of some very expensive wine. They would hand an envelope full of cash. The cash would go under the table. We'd say hello. They would speak in Ukrainian, and then we'd leave and go have lunch and come back 2 hours later. What I didn't realize is that cut down 3 days of paperwork. It was a beautiful system. It was a way of expediting. It was a way that people made a living in a former Soviet Union country, and I didn't appreciate that. So I called this guy, and I'm just going to call him Roger, to complain, and he says, well, let me just tell you a story. This is what happened to me, is I was adopting a boy who was handicapped out of St. Petersburg, Russia. I think that's where it was. And he complained, the mayor and a couple other government officials said they came to him and wanted money, and he wouldn't pay them. So he was adopting 2 kids. He got one child out. The other child, it took
another year.
It seemed like a year, 18 months before they could get him out. And the paperwork was done. It was just stalled because he did not play ball. So what did I learn? In American cultures, you go to the court, you go to the sheriff, you go get a lawyer, you hammer those people, man. You grind them into but over there, the big picture is you want to get these kids home. And it's a different culture. It's a different world. And
he just felt sad that his boy had to stay for another year to 18 months in an institution when he could have been home. And so after Brett heard that story, he was like, okay, we're good. Let's just keep moving here. But I need to put a caveat in for that because things are better now because of the Hague Convention that safeguards international adoption. The corruption has decreased. I don't know how much, but it's much, much better.
I wouldn't call it corruption. I'd call it grease money. And I would love to go back to those days where a couple $1,000s, you can get that child out of the country in a couple days. And boy, we would love to see that system back.
Well, it would be awesome if countries would work together a little better to help those kids.
I love your phrase, play ball. Games are games where you just learn the rules of the game, whatever the game is, and play ball. Now the challenge in international adoption is that there is hardly any because nobody can agree on the rules of the game. And so the kids are just stuck. They can't move.
The saddest part of that is, as these children age out at 16 in most of these countries, they will be trafficked. And we've got all these laws and all these regulations and fees and backlogs so that it prevents trafficking. But the true trafficking is not in the families providing homes. It's in these kids not having a home and aging out and then trying to figure out what to do when you're 16, 17, 18 on the street.
And they turn to trafficking as a way to survive.
Wow. Thank you for listening to Voices of Adoption. I'm Donna Pope.
And I'm Nathan Gwilliam. Every voice in the adoption triad deserves to be heard and understood.
Visit voicesofadoption.org to subscribe and access additional resources. And then join us next time as we continue to build bridges through conversation.